bottom of some above of 66a. Second to last line. Okay, so yesterday we discussed the concept of shinoi kaina, changing the stolen item. By changing the stolen item, you acquire it. And then we had a debate between Rav Yosef and I believe it was it's the debate between Rav Yosef and another Gemara, which seems to be unnamed in the passage, which is whether or not yush is kaina. If the owner gives up on finding it, does that mean that the thief acquires it? So the Gemara will discuss this shinei kaina, yush kaina is basically the whole discussion today. Rav Yosef has a following question to Rabba. Rabba seems to be the opinion that says that yush is kaina. Again, Rav Yosef says yush is not kaina. Rabba says yush is kaina. If the original owner gives up on finding his stolen object, the robber acquires it according to Rabba, and according to Rav Yosef, he does not. What's the question? Gozal chametz for overall on Pesach. A robber steals chametz and then he holds the chametz over Pesach. Okay, so now there's a rabbinical injunction here that because the chametz was held over Pesach, we cannot use by a Jew. We cannot use the chametz.
Oh, it's more than just its owner.
I'm sorry.
It's more than just the owner originally.
Right. Nobody's able to use this chametz. It has to be disposed of. So the robber, the robber tells the owner, "Look, here's your chametz back." Even though this chametz is worthless, he can't do anything with it. It doesn't make a difference. It's still the same chametz. It hasn't been changed in any which way. So therefore, he can return it. It's just one problem. The problem here is the owner gave up on his chametz before Pesach. In other words, by getting rid of his chametz, he effectively says, "I don't want any chametz, even the chametz that's in the house of the ganav." So therefore, the ganav now should acquire a chametz before it was Pesach. So the monetary obligation here precedes the holiday, and therefore he should have to pay. So Amaya Omer like if you can tell me that Yush works and the robber has to pay, has a financial obligation here in place of the actual stolen item. Amaya Omer lehav. How could he give back the stolen item and say, "Here is your stolen item"? He should have to pay cash. So Rabba would respond to Rav Yosef, okay, there's just one catch. Got to mention, of course. What's the catch? In other words, there's a distinction here, because over here you steal chametz before Pesach. The robber doesn't either want the chametz. If you steal a regular, you steal a table and the owner gives up, presumably the robber wants to keep it. But chametz he doesn't want to keep because Pesach is fast approaching, meaning like in an hour from now. That's when the owner gave up on it. That's when the robber doesn't want to acquire it either, because he doesn't need chametz. He doesn't need the hour worth of chametz. Was that? Yeah.
That's from Rabbi.
Yeah. There's a joke they used to say in Shiva. There was somebody who he had his own. He kept a private bottle of milk, and everyone kept taking from it. So he put in big letters. He wrote, "Ulcer to take." It didn't make a difference. Everyone kept taking it. So finally, he wrote in the bottle "Chol Stam." Nobody took it. Now, in all fairness, it's very likely that somebody thought that the guy himself took the bottle from yeshiva. In other words, so they thought that he just wrote it. It's also to take because it wasn't really his. He just okay, whatever. In all fairness to the guy, but the point is, yeah, he took away very from Ganav. Okay. Okay. So therefore, the question is not difficult. This type of yish is different because the Ganav, the robber, does not want to acquire. Ace Abai Rabba. So Abai had the following question to Rabba. Karbonai v'loy hagozel. The Torah says you have to, when you bring a sacrifice, you have to bring karbana, your own carbon. If this is your carbon, you can't bring a stolen carbon. What's the scenario? If it's before the guy gave up on the animal, salam alikra. Why do I need a verse? Pshita, obviously you can't bring a stolen sacrifice. We'll soon see that it's not so obvious. Okay, that's the resolution. But okay, we'll get there. Elalav must be lachar yish, after he gave up. Shmamino yish laikani. We see from here that despite the fact the owner gave up on the stolen item, the robber does not acquire it, and therefore he cannot bring the animal to sacrifice. Amr le Rava, so Rava says ultamech. It's not such a strong question. Why? Because Hadatanya, the Brisa says mishkavid v'lo hagosel. Okay, this here is talking about a zov, tuma zov. A zov, we said, is a seminal emission that does not seem to happen today in the modern world. And it has a unique feature that, again, it's a male form of tuma, obviously, and it makes mishkav tame. What is mishkav? Anything the zov sits on that's meant for sitting, like a chair, for example, then the chair becomes tame. Even if he sits on a whole stack of chairs, he only touches the top one. All the chairs are tame. Same thing, let's say, if he sleeps on 10 mattresses, right? But if he sleeps on top of a car, let's say, the car does not become tumas mishkav, because a car presumably is not built for sleeping. At least not on the roof. Okay, now, so mishkav v'le'agos, meaning the zav sleeps on mishkavai. What does it mean? His own bedding, his own mattress. Then his mattress becomes tummy. Hold on, hekdami. If he stole the wool and turned it into a mattress, well, that is considered shinimaisa. That's an actual change. You took the wool, you built it into something else. So of course the robber acquires it. So what must you say? The gazel mishkav the chavre, he stole a mattress from his friend. One second. Okay, so in other words, it must be that he stole his friend's mattress and he does not make his friend's mattress tummy. In other words, even though typically speaking, you could impact somebody else's stuff by making a tummy. However, this is an exception. You can't make your friend's mattress tummy if it doesn't belong to you.
You can or you
Cannot. Okay. Even now, similarly, if you steal your friend's sacrifice, not only does it not, the Gemara's point here is that not only does it not work for you, obviously, because we're talking about in a scenario before he was Miyayish, before he gave up. But I might think that it actually works for my friend. Maybe I bring the sacrifice, it doesn't work for me, but it works for him. Because before Yish. So therefore, that's what the Torah is excluding. We're talking here, of course, before Yish. And it could be that after Yish, it could be he could bring his friend's sacrifice. Meaning the owner gave up.
Oh, okay.
So now the robber acquires the sacrifice and he can bring it for his own needs. But we're talking here before Yish, and the reason why he cannot bring, and not only can he not bring the sacrifice because he doesn't own the animal, but also the animal, he cannot bring the sacrifice for the original owner either. Sacrifice is invalid. Period. Not for the robber, not for the original owner. So Abai had the following question to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, remember, says Yish ene kaina. The owner giving up is not a method for the robber to acquire the stolen object. Okay. You have these skins. Okay, so now skins is like leather, I guess. So now as follows: if you have a craftsman, right? So he sells his leather in specified products. He has a number of leather products. You can buy leather from him. However, if you have an individual, he kills an animal or slaughters an animal, he has leather. He sometimes finishes his leather at different stages. There's different stages to the tanning process. And at any point in time, he might have a use for the item even before it's fit for sale in one of the categories. I'm no leathersmith here, but you can buy leather that's finished in various ways, right? And at various levels. Some of the leather we have is like it's extremely polished. It's dyed. It's very neat. You can buy leather that's much more raw, right? It's not dyed. It's not. And I presumably you probably could buy leather even before the tanning process is finished. Okay, so you have a skin. It's being worked on by balabais, by a regular guy, not a craftsman. Okay, so and at some point he decides, you know what, the skin, it looks like it's ready to be a tablecloth. So he stops working on the leather. Or for example, he decides he's going to send it through the planer and turn it into cloth, right? A parchment. Plane off half of it and the rest of it's parchment. So the thought of using the item as is before, in other words, let's say for example, there's 5 stages to finish leather, and he's at stage number 3. Right now, the craftsman who sells only stage 4 or 5, properly finished products. So if he has a thought that he wants to keep the stage 3 item as a stage 3 item, his thought doesn't make a difference. But because he's not going to, because he has a business and he sells only, stage 4 and 5. But if you have a regular household owner who sometimes will find a use for a stage 3 tanned item, so therefore his thought makes it tummy. In other words, it takes it from a skin to a finished item. Whether that finished item is parchment, we'll soon see maybe it's a tablecloth. Okay, v'shel avdam, but if it's a craftsman, ein machshavim tamasan. His thought does not result in tumah until it's reached its necessary stage, the stages that he usually sells his skins at. Okay, shel ganev, if there's a thief, machshavim tamasan, the thief's thought makes a tummy. Shel gazlan, okay, but if the thief this guy's a gazlan, remember, a gazlan is like a mugger. He's the type of guy that he robs your house by daytime when you're in the house without a gun. Very obnoxious fellow. So shal gazlan ein machshav mitamasan. The gazlan, his robbery, if he thinks that the skin is done, it does not result in the item being susceptible to tumah. I should have mentioned this earlier. The key point here is when can the item become tummy? It only becomes tummy when it's a vessel. When it's just a plain skin that's in process, it's a raw product. It's not susceptible to tumah. So again, the thought of the house, the homeowner, makes it tummy. Why? Because occasionally he will use unfinished products. The thought of the craftsman does not make it susceptible for tumah, because he only sells things in its categories. And if he thinks to use it before it's reached that point, it is not susceptible for tumah. If a nighttime robber steals something, it is susceptible to tumah. Why? So this first opinion is because a nighttime robber, you don't really know who stole it. Hence, he's a nighttime robber. So you don't know who stole it, you don't know where you'll find it, where to collect it from. Effectively, so therefore what? Therefore this yush, he's given up on finding it. If there's yush, now the robber is the proper owner. And therefore his thought on when the item is complete makes it susceptible to tumah. Whereas a gazlan, a mugger, so he knows exactly who stole it. Right? The guy walked in by daytime without a gun and stole his skin. This guy, he knows who to collect from, so therefore he thinks he's going to get it back, and therefore the thought of the gazlan does not count. His thought is not significant because he's not the owner. So you'd have to wait until the skin is physically changed in order for it to be susceptible to receive tumah. Okay, Reb Shimon has a slight variation. He says chilaf advarim the opposite order. Shalgazan mashal b'tamasin, shalganav ein mashal b'tamasin. He says as follows: if a guy is a daytime thief, so he's a mugger, he's obviously a tough guy, right? He's big, he's built. He's the type of guy who you're not going to mess with. That's why he steals by day. That's why the guy is so obnoxious, because he knows no one's going to mess with him. If no one's going to mess with him, for sure the owner has given up. For sure the owner has given up on getting back his item. However, Shalganav, a nighttime thief, well, maybe he'll find out. Machshav and Tamasan over there. 1 second. Machshav and Tamasan, the nighttime thief, his thoughts are meaningless because he doesn't own the item, because the owner has not given up. We see from here, Yosh Koina. Okay, this is very strong proof that if you give up on finding something, then if you give up the original owner gives up on his stolen item, then the robber acquires it. Pretty strong raya? Yeah?
Have to be a mind reader to figure this out.
So we said there's two types of robbers. Whichever way you go, whether we say that there is far more insolence to the mugger, or we say it's harder to figure out who the nighttime thief was. Either way, in one of the categories, we say that you've given up on the stolen item. Therefore, the robber is the owner, and his thoughts are the determinant factor whether or not the item is susceptible for tumah, to receive tumah. Clearly, giving up on the stolen item, it does make the thief the bona fide owner of it. It transfers his obligation from the stolen item to a monetary obligation. Together? Okay. Okay. So Rav Yosef responded, well, actually, this Bryce is not even talking about thinking. He thought about it, but he also actually cut it. Okay, so for example, let's say he stole a piece of parchment and he decided to cut it down to usable size. Well, okay, Maskel Rabbi Bachanan B'halei Itzva Shanokan. The Itzva Ein Tzrich Gitzua. Rabbi Bachanan says, 1 second. The Bryce here is not talking about using parchment, right, which is a hide product. Parchment is a product of the animal hides. We're not talking about parchment. What are we talking about here? We're talking about itzvan. Itzvan is effectively a tablecloth. So you take a large, you take a large skin. I don't know if anyone's been to my house, you notice I have a lot of leather-bound stuff. My uncle, he worked with leather a lot. He was a leather craftsman. And I used to go to his house, and he had like huge hides, raw. He had all different levels. He had like hides of like polished, finished leather, and he had hides with like very raw leather. Some dyed, some not. They're big. You can just this table will be perfect. You throw a hide over it covers the whole table. Right? They didn't have plastic, petroleum distillate products. Okay. Now, so if you notice, a hide, as you might imagine, has a certain shape to it, right? It has the feet sticking out in the middle and the bottom, and it has the head sticking out on top. They're all roughly that shape, unless they were cut down to size. Okay, but so now, if you're using it for Sefer Torah, you notice that the Sefer Torah, everything is rectangle, right? Because somebody came with a razor blade and sliced it correctly. Didn't start off that way. It started off like a hide. Now that's true of certain leather products. You have to finish them by cutting them to size. But for itzva, for a tablecloth, you don't have to cut it down to size because you want it to hang over the table. So the feet are hanging in the thing. Sometimes you go to people's houses, it's a wealthy thing. They have, sometimes now they sell it as, they sell plastic versions, the same thing. They have like this entry mat. It's like a zebra hide or something. Oh, okay. And it's like shaped, like it's shaped like a hide. It's not cut to size.
Yeah, like sort of having an animal head on your table when you're eating.
So it's well, no. So with the table, it hangs over the table, so you don't really notice, let's say, the shape of the hide. But you have an entry mat that and sometimes they even leave the head on it. You seen that?
I have seen that.
They have like a blanket
on the table.
Yeah. No, but if the table's small, then okay. Anyway, so itzva ain't tzriching gitzua. Itzva tablecloth doesn't need to be cut. The Tanan kol makom okay. Now, how do we know we're talking about itzva tablecloth. The time we learned. Kol makom she'ein chesar malacha machshav mitamasa. Yesh chesar malacha ein machshav mitamasa. Chutz min itzva. Okay, so the general rule usually is as follows. Let's say you're a craftsman, okay, and you have a block of wood, right? You have a maple tree in your backyard, and you chop it down. You have a big bark. You have cut it down to a square. You have a big block of wood. You think, you know what? I want to turn this into a bowl, right? Well, it's a block of wood. There's no tumah here. You have to actually put it onto a lathe, and chip at it until you shape it into a bowl. Fair enough? Because obviously a block of wood is not a bowl. It's not. The same thing is true of leather. If you think that you want to make a leather talus bag and you want finished polished leather, then you have to actually cut it to size. You have to the leather has to be finished, and you have to sew it together before your thought will have any significance. Except there's one exception to this rule, which is itzva. It's for the tablecloth, even though you could cut the tablecloth to size, even if the head space and the extra pieces for the feet are hanging around, it doesn't make a difference. Machshava still works. In other words, you had a large skin, right? You tanned it, you dyed it, it's still raw. So now it's a finished hide, but it's still a raw product. Now you decide, you know what, tablecloth. That moment, it's vulnerable for tumah. Before you thought tablecloth, well, maybe you'll use this to make a handbag. Maybe you'll use it to cover the chairs in your car, the seats in your car. There's lots of things you could use leather for. Right. At that point, even though it's a finished raw product, not susceptible for tumah. Once you think that you want to use it for tablecloth, it's susceptible. Even though you could trim it, because it's usable as is, then it's susceptible to tumah as is, even before it might be trimmed.
But even if you decide to change your mind,
then it'll be too late to change your mind, unless you did an action to change your mind. So, for example, let's say you decide to use it for your car. So, car seats, the shapes are much different than tablecloths. So you start taking the what's called the thing with the stencil, right? And you frame it out. You do it with the chalk, and then you start cutting. At that point, it's no longer tablecloth. It's at the point where it's not a tablecloth, then you can reassign it to something else, and then you'd have to wait until the product was finished, and then it would be vulnerable for tumah again.
Okay, so it wouldn't have tumah when you
started
to cut it.
Exactly, or maybe when chalk was on, depending on.
Okay.
I'm not a leather craftsman, so I can't tell you exactly how it works, but something like that.
Changes state.
Correct. If you were reupholstering a couch, and similar idea.
get your uncle on the phone. He might be awake.
Okay, he was passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. Now, now, if we're talking, how do we know we're talking about a tablecloth? Because here we're talking about machshava. We're talking about thoughts. So clearly we must be talking about a tablecloth, because a tablecloth is an item that can take a raw hide and turn it into a usable item. Now it's not raw, it's a finished product. And it doesn't require cutting. So that must be what the type of finished product we're talking about in the Brisa. And yet the Brisa still says very clearly it depends on Yish. It's a very strong question against Rav Yossi. It's such a good question. Ela Amar Rava says, "Hi Milsa Koshi Bar Rava Rav Yosef Estim V'Tartin Shnin." This question was bothering Rav Yosef for 22 years, while Rabba was the leader of the school. He was Rosh Yeshiva, 22 years. V'Lei Africa, and Rav Yosef could not answer the question. It was a very strong question. Ad Yosef Rav Yosef Bereisha, until Rabba passed away after 22 years, and then Rav Yosef ended up being the Rosh Yeshiva for another 2 years before he passed away. Uparka, and he answered the question. He resolved it. So once he was Rosh Yeshiva, he had a very simple resolution. Then it all changed, right? Shini Hashem Kashina Ma'asidami. The change of the name is just like a change in a physical change. Okay, let's explain. Shina Ma'isa Ma'itaimo. When you do an actual change, meaning you have a piece of wood, you run it on a lathe until you turn it into a wood bowl. It's a shina ma'isa. If you stole a rope, if you stole a billet of wood, you turned it into an electric guitar, right? That is a shina ma'isa. You own the finished product. My time. Initially, what you had was wood. Now you have a vessel. Shini Hashem Nami. If you change the name of the item, even without changing the characteristics, you also have made a substantive change. Why? Initially, they called this a skin. The hashta abarazin. Now they call it a tablecloth. So in other words, the fact that the name changes is sufficient. 1 second.
So if you're in process of changing it, and it hasn't changed yet.
Now, if I remember, okay, well, we'll have to get to this a little later. If I remember correctly, the understanding of this is that Rav Yosef agrees that combined with a Shini Hashem, Yush would work. So you need both features. You need Yush, the owner giving up on finding it, plus Shini Hashem, the fact that the item here has a different title. Right now, it's a tablecloth all of a sudden. That means that the robber acquires it. Okay. So the Gemara says, "V'harei morish." If you have a beam, you built it into a building. Initially, it was kshura. Kshura is a stud, right? And now it's a beam. Now it's v'hashet klola. It's a beam that's part of a building. Which Tanana we learned. Let's say a guy is a robber. He robbed what's called a lumber yard, and he took the lumber yard and he built himself a house. And now he regrets that he wants to do tshuva. He wants to repent. He knows who the thief is, right? He knows who the victim is. The victim is Home Depot, right? He knows exactly who it is. So now what's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to dismantle his house and take out all the screws and give it back to Home Depot? So the Gemara said, now today obviously there's a lot of screws, but in the olden days most houses were timber houses, which means that the frame was built, but the timber was just lined up. It wasn't necessarily drilled together. There were no screws. Okay, so you take the value. In other words, so to allow him to repent, we tell him he can pay Home Depot for the list price. He doesn't have to actually destroy his house and give back the beams. Okay, so the Gemara says so that he's able to repent. We tell him to pay cash instead of having to take down his house. But if not for that, then we would say that we would give back the beam, even though Home Depot has given up on getting the beam back, and the beam now has a different. It used to be called a stud, now it's called a beam. So Amar Veser says no, Morish Shmuelov. It's still called a Morish even after it's built. Even after it's still called a stud even after it's built into a building. Some people call it a beam, some people call it a stud. How do you see this? The tiny we learned. Slois habayas, the beams of the house. Elo hamalatatim. These are the there's a word for these. These are the cross beams that cross the ceiling. What are those called? There's a word for it. Yeah. No, the wood beams that cross over a house. I can't remember what it's called. The floor ceiling beams.
The joists.
The joists. Thank you.
Oh, the joists.
Thank you. The joists. Okay, so the Elam Latin, these are the joists. The Ha'ivim, these are, I think, are the vertical pillars. Elu HaMarishis, they're translated in Targum as Morish. Morish is a stud. Meaning that you see it's called a stud even after it's built into the building. So actually, it's not even a Shini Hashem. That's why you need Tekanas Hashavim. In other words, if you use these beams, which are basically unchanged, they're put into the building unchanged, and now the guy wants to repent, he wants to do tshuva. We don't say you have to dismantle the building, give back the beams as is. We tell him Tekanas Hashavim, because the truth matter is from the perspective of Yush, there's neither a Shini Hashem nor a Shini Ma'aseh. Nothing's changed about the beam. The beam is still exactly how it was when it was on the shelf in the lumberyard. Okay. Rav Zera says, Shini HaKoyz L'Bar Yosef, B'Shini Hashem Lo HaV'Shinei. Rav Zera says, if you have a item that its name changed, but sometimes people will take it back to its original use. It's not considered a Shinei. It's not considered a change. The robber does not own it. So the Gemara asks, V'Shinei Hashem She'en HaKoyz L'Bar Yosef, we have a Shinei. One second. Okay. If the name changes, but there's no substantive, but it can go back to what it was originally. Have 1 second. Is that considered a change? So we'll see the Bryce, we'll see the question, we'll explain it better. All right, senior, you have a pipe. Okay, what exactly is going on here? This is the law of mikvahs. You're building a mikvah. According to Rashi, there's major machlokes Rashi and Taisus here. I'll prefer Taisus' pshat here, so I'm going to skip Rashi's pshat. Taisus' pshat is just much easier to understand. Okay, so what happened was you had a mikvah, right? So you built a cistern. Fine. The cistern's kosher cistern. Now you want to fill it, right? So what you did was you took a large gourd, which in the times of Talmud, gourds were used for everything. They show up everywhere in Talmud. They're used for everything. So you took a big gourd, gourd like a squash.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I believe that's what it is. 1 second. No, sorry. It doesn't have to be a gourd. It could be a plain piece of wood as well. It could be a piece of wood. And what he wanted to do here is he wanted to channel, let's say, either he could channel a stream or a spring. He wanted to channel that water into the mikvah. So every time it rains, or in the case of the spring, constantly, it would fill up the cistern. Okay, so what did he do? So you have this, so he put the wood, so there's 2 ways he can do this. The first method is he screws the wood into the ground, and then he creates the channel in the wood. He turns the wood into the pipe that he's looking for. The other way to do it is to first take a pipe and then screw it in. So in other words, did you take a pipe and then screw it in, or did you take a piece of wood, screw it in, and then turn it into a pipe? You turned it into a pipe by drilling through it, effectively. Now, what's the key idea here? The key question here is what we call mayim she'uvim. The water that's used to fill a mikvah cannot go through a vessel. For argument's sake, this type of pipe is called a vessel. Now, if the pipe if the pipe is if it was a pipe before you put it into the ground, so first it was a vessel, then you screwed it into the ground, it remains a vessel, and therefore all the water that goes through it now is mayim she'uvim. However, if you took a raw material, screwed it into the ground, so now it's part of the ground. Then you went and took your drill and drilled through it. Now you made a hole in the ground. Now, technically speaking, they're both pipes, right? They look identical.
Right.
It's a Shini Hashem there, right? You change the name of the item. Now the question is, well, that's really where we're headed to. Okay, I'm just going to conclude here with we'll get to it in a moment. I'll bring it in here now. The Gemara will point out that mayim she'uvim is derabanan. It's a rabbinical invalidation. This, of course, is what I said is a major debate between Rashi and Taisus. Now, in truth, the halacha follows Rashi here, not Taisus. I'm telling you Taisus pshat because it's easier to understand Taisus in the context of the Gemara. Okay. According to Taisus, the fact that if you fill a mikvah completely with water that has traversed a pipe, that which is considered a vessel, that mikvah is only rabbinically invalid. The halacha is not that way. The halacha is that it's biblically invalid. Rashi has to make a slight variation here to explain exactly the Gemara. I prefer Taisus pshat, so go Taisus.
But then it's invalid, and that's the bottom line.
If what?
Well, the pipe is invalid unless you put it in the ground first.
Correct. You have to put the raw material and then create it to a pipe. Okay, so let's see this. You had a piece of wood. You turned it into a pipe. Well, kavu, then you screwed it into the ground. It invalidates a mikvah. Kavu, if you took a raw piece of wood, screwed it into the ground, then you turned it into a pipe. It does not invalidate the mikvah. If you say that the change of name is significant, even if you drilled it into the ground as a raw piece of wood and then turned it into a pipe, it should also be invalid. Why? Because now it's called a pipe. So who cares that you turned the ground into a pipe? but now it's called a pipe. We should give it its own significance, even though it was screwed in previously. See, Rav Zera is arguing that the concept of Shini Hashem should not exist. We should not give any significance to the fact that the item has a different name. So Gemara says, Shani She'iva D'min Rabbanani. Mayim Shuvin is unique because it is a rabbinical invalidation. And therefore, we say that if it was screwed into the ground as a raw piece of wood, and then you turn it into a pipe, we say it's kosher. Then we should kosherize the mikveh, even if the pipe was a pipe before it was screwed into the ground, because it's only rabbinical. The Gemara says, Teres kliel b'tolash. Hasa make a teres kliel b'tolash. Hacha ain't teres kliel b'tolash. The question is, before you screw it into the ground, what did you screw into the ground? Did you screw a raw piece of wood into the ground, or did you screw a pipe? If you screwed a pipe into the ground, we'll say it's invalid. If you screwed a raw piece of wood and then you turned it into the same pipe, then we're lenient. Meisve, a question. Haganav agazan va'onas. You have a ganev, a robber, right? A nighttime robber. Gazan is the mugger. Onas is the chamsin. We spoke about chamsin briefly in the past. The chamsin is a guy who pays. So he goes over to you, he steals your mug, he hands you $5 and he walks on. Doesn't ask you. Okay. Hektish and hektish, if they sanctify the item they stole, the sanctification is valid. Utrumos and truma, if you take off truma, it's valid as well. Umaiser is a meiser. Their meiser is valid also. Okay. This clearly contradicts the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. Because over here we see that if the owner, a robber who steals something, he steals wheat, he can take off trumas and meisers. How could he know what can take off trumas and meisers? It doesn't belong to him. It must be yush, and therefore he acquires it.
Yush?
Yush. The owner gave up on finding it.
That's right.
So the Gemara says, well, what do you know? It's not quite that. It's not quite, because there's also a Shini Hashem here. By taking off truma, you take it, the item was previously called tevel. Tevel means a mixture of truma and chulin, a mixture of usable material plus truma, which cannot be used. And now it's called chulin. Now you can eat it. So there actually is a Shini Hashem. And as we explained in Rav Yosef, the Yush combined with Shini Hashem is kaina. The robber acquires a stolen item with Yush and Shini Hashem. The Mikar Tevel V'Hashta Truma. Now originally it was Tevel, now it's Truma. Hektish, Mikar Chulin V'Hashta Hektish. Originally it was Chulin, now it's sacrifice. Okay. Omer of Chizr. If Chizr says, Omer of Yanison, the name of Rabbi Yanison, Minayan L'Shina Shehu Kaina. Yeah, we'll see. Okay, we'll see in another minute and we'll stop. How do you know that Shina is kind of changing an item is an act of acquisition? We saw this Gemara previously. Shenemar v'heishav v'segzela. You return the stolen item. Ma Talmud loimer asher gazel. What does it mean, asher gazel, that you stole? Obviously, if you're returning a stolen item, you're returning what you stole. Why does the Torah need to repeat itself? V'heishav segzela, return the stolen item that you stole. You stole it, obviously. If you're returning a stolen item, obviously you stole it. If it's like it was when you stole it, meaning you didn't change it, then you give it back. But if it is changed, you have to pay cash. So the Gemara asks, okay, let's explain this very briefly. Let's say a person's father was a shomer, right? He made an oath that the item was stolen, and he actually is the thief. And then he admits to it and he passes away before he has a chance to pay. So we say, Asher Gazal, in order to get the atonement and pay Karen V'chaimish, the principal plus the atonement, which is a 20% penalty, right? 20% net, so actually 25%. So therefore, that can only be paid by the one who lied, the one who admits to lying. His children don't pay the penalty. And that we don't really learn that from Asher Gazal. So the Gemara says, the verse could have said, return your stolen item. And that would mean not your father's stolen item. That would also exempt the children from their father's false oath that their father admitted to but didn't get around to paying before he passed away. Asher Gazal, that was stolen in general. Why is that necessary? We see from here two ideas. Number one, that you can return the item. You have to return the item as it was stolen. meaning shina is kaina. If you change it, it becomes yours. It's no longer the stolen item. And number two, that if your father stole an item and lied, if your father was watching an item, lied about it, and he actually was a thief, and then he admitted to lying, but he passed away before he can make the payment, you only pay the penalty, the principal. You don't pay the 20%.